Today, I want to share with you something that genuinely transformed my life, something so simple, yet so powerful, that I can confidently say it reshaped my mindset, my habits, and my future. It's called the 1 hour rule. No, it's not a magic trick. It's not some secret hack. It's a commitment 1 hour a day, every single day, dedicated solely to becoming a better version of yourself. Think about it, there are 24 hours in a day. We spend hours working, commuting, scrolling on our phones, or watching Netflix. But what if you took just one of those hours and made it sacred, untouchable, non-negotiable, an hour to learn, grow, and build the life you actually want? I started this when I hit a low point. I was stuck mentally, emotionally, professionally. I didn't need motivation. I needed momentum. And that started with this one habit, giving myself 1 hour a day to invest in my dreams. When I first began applying the 1 hour rule, I was driven purely by motivation. You know, that surge of inspiration you get after watching a powerful video, reading a book, or attending a seminar. That feeling that makes you believe you can change your life overnight. That's what I had at the start. I was excited, determined, and full of energy. I told myself, this time it's going to be different. And for the first few days it was. I woke up early, opened my laptop, and got to work on my goals. But then something happened, something that always happened before the motivation wore off. It wore off because motivation is an emotion. It's fleeting. It comes and goes based on mood, energy, and even the weather. And when it disappeared, so did my will to show up for that 1 hour. I started bargaining with myself. Maybe I'll skip today and double up tomorrow. Or I had a long day, I deserve a break. These were the same patterns that had kept me stuck for years. That's when I realized that if I was going to change my life, I couldn't rely on how I felt. I had to rely on something stronger, something built, not felt discipline. Discipline isn't glamorous. It's not loud or exciting. It's quiet, repetitive, and often inconvenient, but it's also reliable. And when I decided to treat my 1 hour rule as a non-negotiable appointment with myself, like showing up to work or paying a bill, everything started to shift. At first it was difficult. I didn't want to sit down for that hour. I didn't feel like it. But I forced myself to do it anyway, day after day. Whether I was tired, uninspired, or busy, I did it. And slowly a new habit started forming. Not just a habit of action, but a habit of mindset. What surprised me most was that this discipline began to bleed into other areas of my life. The more consistent I became with my 1 hour commitment, the more disciplined I became with my sleep, my diet, my routines, and even my work ethic. It was like training a muscle. Every time I resisted the urge to skip that hour and chose discipline instead, I became a little stronger. That 1 hour each day was no longer just a productivity tool, it was a daily exercise in mental toughness. I began to understand that discipline is what bridges the gap between desire and achievement. Everyone wants to be successful. Everyone wants growth, wealth, freedom, happiness. But very few are willing to do what's boring, what's hard, what's uncomfortable every single day. The 1 hour rule forced me to practice this. It forced me to keep promises to myself even when there was no instant gratification, even when there were no results yet, even when no one else was watching. That's when real transformation began. There were days when I still felt the pull of my old habits, scrolling through social media, binge, watching shows, or procrastinating under the guise of self-care. But the discipline I had built gave me the clarity to say no. I had reconditioned my brain to understand that consistency beats intensity. I didn't need to work for 8 hours a day to make progress. I just needed to show up for one focused, disciplined hour, and the more I did, the more natural it became. Discipline became a part of my identity. Eventually, that 1 hour became the anchor of my day. It was the time I trusted myself the most. I didn't dread it any more. I started to protect it. Friends would ask me to hang out or schedule things during that hour, and I would politely decline. That may sound extreme, but here's the truth. When something matters to you, you make time for it. That hour became sacred, and the discipline I built around it taught me how to honor my own growth without apology. Looking back, I realized that discipline gave me something motivation never could control. Motivation made me feel good in the moment, but discipline gave me the ability to take charge of my life, regardless of how I felt. And in that control, I found confidence, progress, and freedom. The kind of freedom that only comes when you stop being a slave to your emotions and start being the architect of your habits. One of the most unexpected outcomes of practicing the 1 hour rule was the discovery of my true passions. Before I committed to that hour each day, I lived on autopilot. I was going through the motions: work, eat, scroll, sleep, repeat. My life was filled with tasks and responsibilities, but very little intention. I had vague ideas of what I liked and what I thought I was good at, but I had never really explored them deeply. I didn't have the time, or at least, that's what I told myself. The truth was, I never made the time. When I began carving out that 1 hour daily, it was originally for self-improvement, reading, learning, maybe building a skill that could help me earn more or perform better at work. But something interesting started to happen. As I began spending consistent, focused time with myself without distractions, without pressure, I noticed that I was naturally drawn to certain activities. Certain books held my attention longer. Certain topics sparked curiosity. Certain ideas felt energizing instead of draining, and for the first time in years I started listening to those signals. The 1 hour rule gave me permission to explore without expectation. It wasn't about instant success or turning a hobby into a hustle. It was just about following what interested me, a luxury that many of us rarely give ourselves as adults. I began experimenting. I tried writing, journaling, designing, coding, podcasting, even sketching. Some things I dropped after a few days. Others I kept coming back to, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That's when I realized I was getting closer to something meaningful. As children, we're naturally curious. We follow what excites us without fear of failure, but somewhere along the way we're taught to be practical. We're told to pursue what's safe, what makes sense, and in that process we lose touch with our genuine interests. We stop exploring. We stop playing. The 1 hour rule reconnected me to that childhood curiosity. I began to see that passion isn't something you're born with, it's something you uncover, layer by layer, through intentional time and repeated curiosity. The key was consistency. Passion doesn't always show up in fireworks and aha moments. Sometimes it whispers through repetition. Because I was dedicating an hour every day to learning and creating, I started to notice patterns. For example, I realized I lost track of time when I was writing. I felt energized after researching certain topics. I got excited imagining how I could turn these activities into something more. These weren't random observations, they were clues, and the 1 hour rule helped me spot them. And passion isn't just about joy. It's also about what you're willing to endure. Some of the things I enjoyed also challenged me. They frustrated me. They made me question myself, but I kept coming back to them. That's when I learned that passion isn't always easy. It's something that holds your attention even when it's hard. That hour each day became a laboratory for self-discovery. I was testing, failing, learning, and slowly figuring out who I was beneath the noise of daily life. Another powerful thing happened along the way. I started shedding the false ideas of passion that others had placed on me. I used to think my purpose had to align with what I studied in school or what others praised me for. But as I committed to that daily hour, I realized that some of those paths were never mine to begin with. I had simply adopted them because they seemed safe or impressive. The 1 hour rule allowed me to peel those layers away and get honest with myself about what I actually enjoyed and what I was simply tolerating. Eventually, I found myself naturally designing my life around these emerging interests. What started as casual curiosity became consistent commitment. That hour gave me clarity, and that clarity became direction. I no longer felt aimless or lost because I had reconnected with what made me feel alive. And none of that would have happened without the quiet, consistent space that the 1 hour rule created, a space where I could finally hear my own voice. One of the most powerful realizations I had after committing to the 1 hour rule was just how much progress I was making, not in dramatic leaps, but in quiet, consistent steps that compounded over time. When I first started, it didn't feel like much. An hour a day didn't seem significant. It was just 60 minutes, a small sliver out of 24 hours. But that's the illusion of small beginnings. The true impact wasn't in a single day, or even a single week. It was in the accumulation of effort. At first, I didn't even notice the compounding. I was so focused on just showing up, making sure I didn't break the streak, that I wasn't measuring outcomes. I wasn't tracking progress like a productivity app or a fitness tracker. But after a few months, I realized I had learned more, created more, and grown more than I had in the previous years of just hoping things would change. It was a quiet kind of progress, almost invisible at first, but deeply transformative. Think of it like planting a seed. You water it every day, but for a while nothing seems to happen. Then suddenly a sprout emerges. And eventually, if you keep watering it even when it looks like nothing's growing, it becomes a tree. That's exactly what the 1 hour rule did for me. It allowed my efforts to accumulate without the pressure of overnight results. I was building something steady and strong, not chasing quick wins that fizzle out. The math itself is compelling. 1 hour a day equals 7 hours a week. That's roughly 30 hours a month, over a year. 365 hours. That's more than 9 40-hour work weeks. Think about that. By simply showing up for 1 hour every day, I was giving myself the equivalent of a full-time investment in my personal growth. And unlike most jobs, this work was entirely for me, my dreams, my goals, my future. That kind of focused, consistent effort changes your trajectory in ways you can't always see immediately. The compounding effect didn't just apply to knowledge or skill. It applied to mindset. Every day that I showed up, I was reinforcing a powerful belief that I was capable of growth, that I was someone who followed through. That belief grew stronger every time I honored my commitment, and over time it reshaped the way I saw myself. I stopped identifying with my past failures and started identifying with my future potential, and that mental shift became one of the biggest sources of momentum. Another way the compounding effect revealed itself was through skill development. Whether it was writing, learning about a topic, building something online, or improving my communication, I noticed that tiny improvements stacked on top of each other. A few minutes of better focus here, a deeper understanding of a concept there, and suddenly I was operating on a level I didn't even think I was capable of months earlier. That's what compounding does. It rewards consistency, not intensity. And because I was making progress, I started feeling more motivated, not the fleeting hype, driven motivation I had known before, but a grounded, resilient form of motivation that came from seeing actual results. The more I saw, the more I believed. The more I believed, the more I did. It was a feedback loop of growth, all set in motion by the seemingly small act of dedicating 1 hour a day to something meaningful. What started as a tiny ripple had become a wave of progress. Looking back, I understand now that real transformation rarely comes in bursts. It comes from consistent action repeated over time. The 1 hour rule wasn't just about getting better at something, it was about creating a system that allowed growth to become inevitable. The compounding of that daily hour didn't just improve my skills and mind, it redefined what I believed was possible for my life. One of the most surprising changes that came from practicing the 1 hour rule was a noticeable boost in my confidence. But it didn't happen the way I expected. It didn't come from praise, recognition, or external validation. It came from something much deeper, the simple act of consistently keeping a promise to myself. Every single day that I showed up for that 1 hour, I was building internal trust, and confidence, I realized, is just that, trust in yourself. Before this practice, I struggled with self-doubt, a quiet voice in my mind constantly reminding me of all the things I had started but never finished. I had dreams, yes, but I also had a track record of quitting. That inner narrative became a barrier, making me hesitate to try new things or believe in my ability to follow through. But with the 1 hour rule, something shifted. Each hour I dedicated to growth and self-improvement became a brick in a new foundation. Slowly but surely, I was proving to myself that I could be counted on not by others, but by me. The boost in confidence didn't come overnight. At first I was skeptical. Could just an hour a day really make a difference in how I felt about myself? But the more I showed up, especially on the hard days, the lazy days, the days I felt like giving up, the more pride I began to feel. Not arrogance, but a quiet pride rooted in effort. There's a special kind of confidence that forms when you do things no one else sees, when you push through resistance, when you finish something just because you said you would. This daily discipline also gave me tangible proof of progress. I could look back on a week and say, I've put in 7 hours. I could look at a journal and see pages filled. I could look at a skill and notice improvement. That physical evidence became a mirror that reflected a more capable version of myself. It was no longer about what I hoped I could do, it was about what I had actually done. That's the kind of confidence that isn't shaken easily because it's not based on hype or potential, but on results. And this confidence began spilling into other areas of my life. I started speaking up more, I made bolder decisions, I stopped playing small or second, guessing my every move. I began to trust that if I could stick to a daily hour, something most people give up on quickly, then I could probably handle other challenges too. That confidence became a compass, guiding me through uncertainty. I stopped waiting for permission and started giving it to myself. There's also something deeply empowering about prioritizing yourself, especially in a world that constantly pulls you in 1,000 directions. By reserving that hour each day, I was telling myself, you matter. Your goals, your dreams, your development, they matter. And the more I acted in alignment with that belief, the more confident I felt in my identity. I no longer saw myself as someone who was just getting by. I saw myself as someone who was becoming. What I learned is that confidence isn't something you can think your way into, it's something you earn through action. The 1 hour rule was my training ground. Day by day, I was learning to show up for myself, to take consistent steps even when I was uncertain, uncomfortable, or uninspired. And over time, those small acts of commitment stacked into a powerful belief: I can do this. I am capable. I will grow. That belief changed how I walked into rooms, how I spoke, how I worked, and how I dreamed. It changed my posture not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. I began seeing myself as someone with discipline, direction, and purpose. And that shift in identity was the true source of my newfound confidence. It wasn't about impressing anyone else. It was about finally impressing myself. One of the biggest mental barriers I faced before adopting the 1-hour rule was overwhelm. Life felt like a constant flood of tasks, responsibilities, and expectations. Every time I thought about my goals, whether it was starting a business, writing a book, getting in shape, or learning a new skill, I would immediately feel crushed by the weight of how much there was to do. I'd freeze, overthink, and often do nothing, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know where to start. The mountain always looked too high. I used to create these long to-do lists, packing them with massive goals and micro-tasks, expecting myself to suddenly become superhuman overnight. Inevitably, I'd fall short, and the self-doubt would return stronger than ever. I had unknowingly trained myself to associate growth with pressure and anxiety. Every attempt at progress felt like a sprint toward an invisible, moving finish line. It wasn't sustainable emotionally, mentally, or physically. Then I discovered the simplicity and power of the 1-hour rule, and for the first time in a long time, things began to feel manageable. Instead of trying to conquer everything at once, I gave myself permission to just focus on 1 hour. Not a perfect hour, not a productive hour in the traditional sense, but a focused one, an intentional one. Knowing that I only needed to move the needle slightly each day helped calm the chaos in my mind. That hour became a container. It had clear boundaries. I didn't have to solve every problem or finish every task within it. All I had to do was show up and give it my best for 60 minutes. That clarity removed so much decision fatigue. I wasn't constantly asking myself, what should I do next? Or am I doing enough? I already had the answer: do 1 hour. That was the rule. That was the anchor. As I practiced this consistently, something shifted. I began realizing that progress isn't about doing everything, it's about doing something consistently. And when that something is done with intention and focus, it creates momentum. That momentum, in turn, reduces overwhelm because you begin to feel movement. Even if it's slow, it's steady, and steady movement is incredibly reassuring when you've spent months or years feeling stuck. What's also important is how the 1-hour rule helped me focus on quality over quantity. Before, I was caught in the trap of measuring my productivity by how long I worked or how many things I crossed off a list. But with just 1 hour, I had no choice but to focus, no multitasking, no busy work. Just me, my goal, and 60 minutes. That kind of intentional focus made me realize how much time I had been wasting before, not due to laziness, but due to a lack of structure. As the overwhelm reduced, so did the guilt. I stopped beating myself up for not doing more. I started appreciating the fact that I was actually doing something, and not just once in a while every single day. That consistency helped restore a sense of control over my life. I didn't feel like I was constantly chasing time anymore. I felt like I was working with time. That's a powerful shift. When you respect time, even just an hour of it, time begins to work for you. Most importantly, the 1-hour rule taught me that you don't need to have it all figured out to start. You don't need a perfect plan or unlimited energy or the right time. You just need a manageable starting point. For me, that was 1 hour a day, and with that simple commitment, I was able to chip away at the overwhelm that had once paralyzed me. Bit by bit, task by task, day by day, things started to clear. Not because life got easier, but because I got more focused. One of the most transformative aspects of using the 1-hour rule was how it rewired my habits, not just the surface-level routines, but the deep automatic behaviors that shape my daily life. At first, I didn't even realize it was happening. I thought I was just trying something new, dedicating an hour a day to something meaningful. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I began noticing how many other areas of my life were shifting as a result. The 1-hour rule wasn't just a habit, it was a foundation that began influencing everything else I did. Initially, I had to fight for that hour. I had to rearrange my schedule, turn off distractions, and convince myself that it was worth it. I stumbled a lot in the beginning. There were days I didn't want to do it, days I made excuses, and days I only half showed up. But even in that messiness, something powerful was happening. I was building a new neural pathway. I was teaching my brain that this hour mattered. I was installing a habit loop that would soon become second nature. After a few weeks, I didn't have to think about it as much. I wasn't negotiating with myself every day. I had created a rhythm, a mental cue that said, "This is your hour, this is your time." And because I stuck with it, the resistance began to fade. That's when I realized something profound. Habits are less about willpower and more about systems. The 1-hour rule gave me a repeatable system, and systems beat motivation every time. What was also interesting is how that one habit became a domino that knocked down others. Once I started dedicating time to learning, creating, or improving myself, I became more aware of how I spent my time outside of that hour. I started cutting back on mindless scrolling, late-night binging, and other energy-draining behaviors. Not because I forced myself, but because they didn't feel aligned anymore. My priorities were shifting, and my habits were following naturally. Another surprising shift was how my environment began to change. I started organizing my space to support that daily hour, cleaning up my desk, keeping my tools ready, setting up reminders. This physical reinforcement made the habit easier to follow, and it reminded me every day that this hour was something sacred. I wasn't just building a habit in my mind, I was designing my environment to reflect the identity I was stepping into. Even my internal dialogue began to change. I used to say things like, "I'm just not disciplined," or "I always fall off track." But the more I stuck to my hour, the less those stories made sense. I had evidence now, daily, consistent evidence that I could be disciplined, that I was capable of change, that I did follow through. And once those stories changed, my habits followed more easily. I no longer saw good habits as a punishment or chore. I saw them as self-respect. What made the rewiring stick was the fact that it was small and sustainable. Many people fail at habit change because they try to do too much too fast. I know I used to be one of them, but the 1-hour rule didn't ask for dramatic life overhauls. It asked for consistency, and in that simplicity, it gave me something powerful, momentum. Each day that I followed through added another link to the chain, and the longer that chain grew, the harder it became to break. Eventually, the 1-hour rule wasn't something I had to force. It became automatic, a part of my identity. I didn't need to remember to do it. It just was what I did. That's the ultimate goal of any habit, when it stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like you. And that's exactly what this rule did for me. It rewired my habits from the inside out, reshaping not just how I spent my time, but how I saw myself. One of the most profound benefits of using the 1-hour rule was how it brought long-term clarity into my life, clarity I didn't even know I was missing. Before I adopted this habit, I often felt directionless. I was busy, sure, but I wasn't always moving with purpose. I'd jump from one project to the next, try a dozen things at once, and constantly ask myself, is this really what I should be doing? I had ambition, but no clear map. The 1 hour rule changed that by giving me consistent space to think, reflect, and take focused action. In the beginning, that clarity didn't come right away. I started with the rule simply as a way to improve myself. I chose one area I wanted to grow in, and I showed up for it every day. But something unexpected happened. The more time I spent in deep, undistracted focus, the more my thoughts began to settle. The mental noise quieted down. I stopped feeling pulled in so many directions, and in that stillness my deeper priorities started to surface. I began to understand what truly mattered to me, and, just as importantly, what didn't. The hour gave me time to process things that had previously been buried under the weight of everyday life. So much of our decision-making happens in a rush, reacting to problems, responding to emails, trying to keep up. But when you carve out intentional space every day to think, create, learn, or reflect, you begin to develop a deeper sense of who you are and where you want to go. That's what the 1 hour rule became for me, a daily appointment with my future self. A time to ask, is this the life I want to be building? Over time, patterns began to emerge. I noticed which activities energized me and which ones drained me. I became more aware of my strengths, my weaknesses, and my passions. It became easier to say no to things that didn't align with my goals, and easier to say yes to the things that did, because I was no longer making those decisions in the fog of fatigue and pressure. I had space to listen to myself, instead of being constantly drowned out by the noise of the world. That long-term clarity also showed up in how I set goals. Before, my goals were often vague or reactive, driven by what other people were doing or what I thought I should want. But as I continued using the 1 hour rule, my goals became more intentional. I didn't just want short-term wins, I wanted meaningful progress. And because I was spending an hour each day working toward those goals, I had to become selective. I couldn't chase everything. I had to choose, and in choosing I found focus. The clarity also influenced my relationships. I began to notice how certain people in my life either supported my growth or subtly held me back. That daily hour of self-development became a mirror, reflecting back the energy I was surrounding myself with. I became more intentional about who I spent time with, what conversations I engaged in, and what environments I allowed myself to stay in. The more I honored my own time, the more I expected others to do the same, and that shift brought healthier boundaries and deeper connections. Another powerful realization was how the 1 hour rule helped me connect the dots between today's actions and tomorrow's outcomes. When you invest in yourself consistently, you begin to see how small efforts stack into long-term results. I started thinking in months and years, not just hours and days. That mindset shift changed everything. I wasn't just chasing immediate gratification anymore. I was building something with endurance. That long-term perspective gave me peace, patience, and a deep sense of direction. Finally, perhaps the most valuable gift of all was this. The 1 hour rule helped me understand that clarity isn't something you find all at once, it's something you earn through action. I didn't wake up one day with a perfect vision. But by showing up daily, even when I felt lost, I began to discover it piece by piece. That hour became a compass, and though I couldn't always see the full map, I could always see the next step. That was enough. And that's what gave me the clarity to keep going, not just with purpose, but with peace. Looking back, I can say with absolute certainty, the 1 hour rule didn't just help me improve, it helped me transform. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't overnight, it wasn't easy, but it was consistent, and that consistency created a ripple effect across every area of my life, my mindset, my habits, my confidence, my clarity, and even my peace of mind. Most people underestimate what they can do in a year because they overestimate what they need to do in a day. But 1 hour, just one focused, intentional hour, has the power to shift your trajectory. It becomes the foundation for new habits, the catalyst for clarity, the space where progress begins. It reminds you that you're not stuck. You're not behind, you just haven't committed to the right rhythm yet. The truth is, you don't need a life overhaul, you don't need perfect plans, you don't need motivation 24/7. You just need 1 hour a day to bet on yourself, 1 hour to invest in the future version of you. That version is waiting not in some far-off place, but right here, in the next decision you make, in the next hour you honor, in the next step you take. So if you've been feeling overwhelmed, lost, or stuck, try it. Just 1 hour a day, every day for the next 30 days. Use it to learn, to build, to heal, to grow. Show up for yourself like your dreams depend on it, because they do. And I promise you this, you'll look back one day and realize that this small, quiet commitment was the moment everything started to change.